You are not lacking beauty, you are leaking disorder through your judgments, your reactions, and the way you let other people govern your self-respect. Stay here if you are serious about living with reason, because this channel speaks to the part of you that wants less noise, more honesty, and a steadier mind. Subscribe and return when you need a voice that will not flatter you, excuse you, or let you drift. What follows is not about vanity. It is about discipline of attention, discipline of desire, and the daily work of choosing what belongs to you and releasing what does not. If your mind has been restless, your face has shown it. If your habits have been careless, your presence has shown it. Here you will confront that truth directly and learn how a governed life changes the way you carry yourself, speak, and meet the world today without apology or delay. Number 1. Guard silence. Let presence radiate. Stop speaking so fast that you never hear yourself think. Stop filling the air as if noise were proof of worth. A person who cannot bear silence is already exposed. He is pleading to be seen, begging to be approved, and every unnecessary word gives him away. Beauty begins there, in the refusal to perform, not in the face alone, not in clothes, not in the mirror. It begins in the mind that no longer needs to announce itself at every moment. A quiet person is not empty. He is governed. He knows what belongs to him and what does not. He knows that other people's opinions are not under his command, and so he stops chasing them with his mouth. That is where presence is born, not from effort that looks like effort, but from self-command so steady that others feel it before they can name it. You have already seen the opposite. You have seen how a person can be attractive for a moment and then lose it the instant they start talking too much, defending too much, proving too much. The face may be fine, the clothes may be fine, the voice may even be pleasant, and still the whole thing collapses because the inner life is restless. Restlessness is ugly. Neediness is ugly. A mind that lunges after attention is ugly, even if it wears the best skin in the room. The Stoic does not pretend that appearance does not matter at all. He understands that the body is an instrument and that care is a duty. But he also knows this: the face is not strengthened by vanity. It is strengthened by discipline. The eyes, the mouth, the brow, the posture, the stillness of the whole person all take their shape from the state of the ruling mind. Your presence will always reveal the habits of your soul. So if you seek beauty, begin where beauty is formed, in restraint. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is strength refusing waste. Every time you speak without purpose, you spend part of yourself. Every time you answer every thought that enters your head, you surrender authority to impulse. Every time you rush to fill a pause, you tell the world that your peace depends on sound. A wise person does not live that way. He can sit without performing. He can listen without preparing a counterattack. He can enter a room and not demand to be the center of it. That restraint changes everything. It settles the face. It smooths the movement. It makes the gaze steady. People are drawn to that because they recognize, even if they cannot explain it, that they are near someone who is not divided against himself. This is the first truth. What is attractive in you is not the frantic effort to be attractive. It is the visible sign of inner order. A person who rules himself does not have to advertise it. It shows in how he pauses before speaking. It shows in how he refuses gossip. It shows in how he withholds the first sharp reply. It shows in how he carries private frustration without turning it into public noise. That kind of silence is not weakness, it is judgment. It says, I will not be dragged by every impulse. I will decide. And that decision gives the body a quiet dignity no cosmetic can create. Begin with morning. Before you reach for your phone, before you let the voices of others enter your mind, sit still for a few minutes. Ask yourself one hard question. What in me is under my control today? Not the weather, not the mood of strangers, not whether others admire me, not whether someone answers, not whether the day unfolds as I hoped. Under my control are my judgments, my choices, my attention, my refusal to be ruled by appetite, my willingness to act with reason. Say it plainly. Speak to yourself as you would speak to a student who has been lying to himself. Then decide that today your words will be fewer, cleaner, and more necessary. Not cold, not rude, necessary. A few honest words, well chosen, carry more force than a stream of nervous speech. This exercise alone will begin to change your face, not magically, practically, because the face follows the mind. When the mind stops scattering itself, the features stop chasing every emotion, the jaw relaxes, the eyes stop darting, the mouth stops tightening around complaints. You begin to look like a person who can endure reality. And that is beautiful, not because suffering is beautiful, but because endurance without complaint is noble. People trust the one who does not dissolve under pressure. They feel safe near the one who is not constantly seeking reassurance. That safety is attractive in a way that shallow charm never is. Guard your tongue in conversation. Do not speak to show how much you know. Do not interrupt because silence makes you uncomfortable. Do not tell every story about yourself. The man who cannot stop turning the subject back to himself is not confident. He is hungry. Hunger in the soul is visible. It leaks through every sentence. The Stoic does not feed that hunger. He trains it. He asks whether his words serve the good, whether they are just, whether they are necessary. If they do not serve virtue, he lets them die before they are born. That discipline makes a person lighter. It makes him less noisy, less grasping, less obvious in the wrong way. And paradoxically, it makes him more memorable. A restrained person remains in the mind because he did not overwhelm it. There is also silence in the way you react. Most people think beauty is ruined by bad features. Far more often it is ruined by ugly reactions. A face twisted by irritation becomes smaller. A face ruled by complaint becomes tired. A face that flashes envy or resentment stops being graceful. You do not need a perfect body to look striking. You need a disciplined response to life. When criticism comes, do not rush to defend your ego. When someone ignores you, do not let your self-worth collapse. When plans change, do not punish the room with your frustration. Accept what has happened. You did not command it. Your honor is not lost because circumstances resist you. Your honor is lost when you surrender your reason to them. That is why silence must be practiced, not merely admired. Sit in silence for a fixed time each day without music, without distraction, without talking to anyone. At first, the mind will complain. It will produce little dramas, old resentments, imagined conversations, unfinished arguments. Watch them without obeying them. This is training. You are learning not to kneel before every thought that appears. Most people are not in conversation with their mind. They are being dragged by it. The Stoic refuses that humiliation. He notices a thought, judges it, and lets it pass if it is false or useless. Over time, the silence stops feeling empty. It becomes clean, and when you return to people, you return with a different quality. You are not frantic to speak because you have already met yourself. That inner meeting matters. A person who has never sat alone with his own mind is easy to manipulate. He reaches for praise because he has not learned to stand on virtue. He posts, performs, explains, apologizes for existing, and then wonders why he feels thin. The answer is simple. He has given his center away. The Stoic calls it back. He makes his worth depend on whether he acts well, not on whether he is admired. That choice changes the whole atmosphere around him. He becomes harder to disturb. He becomes more deliberate. He no longer looks like a servant to the crowd. He looks like someone with an interior law, and that interior law is beautiful. Not loud, not dramatic. Beautiful in the way a straight line is beautiful. Beautiful in the way a well-built wall is beautiful. Beautiful because it is fit for its purpose. When your words are few and your intentions clean, people feel it. They may not praise it. They may not understand it. But they feel the difference between a person who is trying to get something from them and a person who has enough dignity to remain himself. That difference is immense. It gives the body weight. It gives the gaze depth. It gives the smile meaning, because it is not a mask. It is the rare, calm expression of a mind that is not at war with itself. At midday, stop for 1 minute and examine your speech. Ask, have I spoken from reason or from appetite? Have I used words to clarify or to impress? Have I repeated myself because I feared being overlooked? Have I taken part in gossip because I wanted to belong to weakness? Do not excuse yourself. See clearly. The value of self-examination is not self-hatred, it is accuracy. A carpenter who lies about the flaw in the wood builds a crooked table. A person who lies about the state of his soul builds a crooked life. Be exact. If you have spoken too much, reduce it in the next hour. If you have been noisy, become plain. If you have been performing, stop. Each correction strengthens the whole. There is beauty in a person who does not need the last word. There is beauty in the one who can let another be wrong without rushing to dominate him. There is beauty in the one who can endure awkwardness without trying to rescue the moment by force. This is not passivity, it is mastery. It means your peace is not held hostage by your urge to control every scene. Most of the time, you are not losing power by remaining silent. You are recovering it. Every unnecessary reaction drains you. Every measured response returns you to yourself. And a person returned to himself stands differently, looks differently, and moves differently. Practice this in relationships. When you feel the need to explain yourself endlessly, pause. Say only what is true and useful. When you feel the urge to win affection by over-talking, stop. Let your conduct speak. When someone else is loud, remain steady. When someone is indifferent, do not beg. When someone praises you, receive it without swelling. When someone rejects you, do not crumple. In every case, keep your own mind under command. That is the real work, not making others respond correctly, making yourself respond correctly. The attractiveness that follows from that is not brittle. It lasts because it rests on character. And character, not ornament, is what endures. The day will come when youth fades a little, then more. The day will come when your face is marked by time. If all you ever built was surface, the loss will be severe. But if you built self-command, then time cannot take the best of you. Silence, practiced rightly, leaves a trace. It marks the features with steadiness. It marks the eyes with restraint. It marks the whole person with an authority that does not beg to be noticed. That is why some people seem beautiful even before they are spoken to. They have made peace with themselves. They no longer leak inner chaos into the room. Do not mistake this for an easy path. Silence will expose you. It will reveal how addicted you are to reaction. It will show you how often you speak to avoid feeling. It will show you how impatient you are with your own emptiness. Good, let it show you. The wound must be seen before it can be treated. The undisciplined mind fears silence because silence removes the excuse. In silence you cannot pretend. In silence you meet the truth of your habits. That is exactly why silence is a discipline worth loving. It strips away the theater. It leaves only what is real. So start today. Speak less, but with more care. Sit in silence and do not flee from what rises inside you. Notice the impulse to fill space and let it die. Refuse gossip. Refuse vanity. Refuse the childish need to be constantly witnessed. Let your presence come from order, not performance. Let your face reflect the steadiness of a mind that knows its duty. Let your beauty be the visible evidence of inner rule, and when the day ends, examine it without excuses. Ask whether your words were necessary. Ask whether your silence was wise or merely fearful. Ask whether you guarded your attention or scattered it. Ask whether you were governed by reason or pulled by impulse. Then answer honestly. That honesty is not harshness, it is freedom. A person who learns to be silent at the right time and to speak only when speech is needed begins to look different almost at once. Not because the world has changed, but because the soul has. And when the soul changes, the body cannot help but follow. That is how beauty deepens. That is how attraction becomes durable. That is how a human being stops begging life for permission and begins to live like someone who has understood that his first duty is self-command. Leave the noise. Keep the discipline. Let the stillness in you become visible. Number 2. Discipline shapes a naturally attractive face. You think discipline is harsh, as if it steals something from you. It does not steal, it removes distortion. And what remains when distortion is gone is what people quietly call attractiveness without understanding it. A face does not become beautiful by accident. It becomes readable. It stops betraying inner chaos. It stops revealing every passing impulse. It starts to reflect order. And order is never loud, but it is always felt. Look closely at your own expression across a normal day. Not the posed version, not the one you show in photos, but the one that appears when you are ignored, when you are delayed, when you are corrected, when you are tired, when you are slightly annoyed and believe no one can see it. That is the real face. That is the face shaped by your discipline or by your lack of it. No mirror creates it. Your habits do. Every unexamined reaction writes itself onto your features over time. The Stoic understanding is simple. Your face is not separate from your judgments. It is the visible echo of your inner governance. You do not notice how often you give permission to disorder. A small irritation arises and you indulge it. A delay happens and you complain internally. A person speaks to you in a tone you dislike and you respond with silent resentment. None of this seems important in the moment. Yet each instance is a small surrender of control. Each surrender trains your mind to be reactive instead of deliberate. And a reactive mind does not produce a steady face. It produces tension, unpredictability, and a kind of restless energy that others can sense before they can describe it. The disciplined person is not one who never feels impulse. That is not human. The disciplined person is one who refuses to obey impulse without examination. There is a pause, a moment of inner inspection, a question placed between stimulus and response. Is this under my control or not? Is this judgment based on reason or on emotion? Is responding necessary or merely satisfying? That pause is where character is formed, and character, not intention, is what shapes how you appear to the world. Most people live as if their reactions are inevitable. They believe irritation must be expressed, that frustration must be released, that discomfort must be escaped. They confuse pressure with permission, but pressure is not instruction, it is only sensation. The Stoic practice is to separate sensation from command. Your body can feel disturbed while your mind remains ordered. Your circumstances can be inconvenient while your judgments remain clean. This separation is not theoretical. It is practiced in real time, in ordinary moments, in the exact places where you usually lose yourself. Start with the morning, before the day scatters your attention. Do not begin by consuming the thoughts of others. Begin by examining your own capacity to govern yourself. Ask what kind of mind you are bringing into the day, not what the day will bring to you. That question already surrenders authority. Instead, ask what you will refuse today. You will refuse automatic irritation. You will refuse unnecessary complaint. You will refuse the urge to exaggerate discomfort. You will refuse to treat every feeling as truth. In that refusal, discipline begins to take shape. Then move through a simple but strict practice. Before accepting any judgment that arises in your mind, pause long enough to question it. You will notice how quickly the mind wants to conclude. It wants to label, to decide, to react. Discipline interrupts that speed. You do not accept every thought as a fact. You hold it in awareness and test it. Is it accurate? Is it useful? Is it distorted by desire or fear? Many thoughts fail this test the moment they are examined. Without examination, they rule you. With examination, they lose authority. This constant evaluation reshapes your expression more than any external care. Because the face is not only muscle and skin, it is habit made visible. A person who constantly indulges irritation begins to carry sharpness in the eyes. A person who constantly indulges complaint begins to carry heaviness around the mouth. A person who constantly indulges insecurity begins to carry hesitation in every movement. These are not aesthetic accidents. They are moral patterns expressed physically. When you understand this, discipline stops being about restriction and becomes about clarity. You are no longer trying to suppress life. You are trying to remove confusion. And confusion is what makes a person look unsettled even when nothing is happening. A disciplined mind does not chase every internal signal. It organizes them. It assigns them value. It discards what is useless. That organization produces a kind of calm consistency that naturally affects posture, gaze, and presence. During the day, practice ownership of attention. Notice where your mind goes without invitation. It will drift toward judgment of others, comparison, imagined outcomes, and replayed conversations. Do not follow it blindly. Bring it back, not once, but repeatedly. This is not failure. This is training. Each return is a strengthening of inner authority. Over time, you begin to experience thoughts as events rather than commands. That shift alone changes how your face carries itself. The tension of obedience to every thought begins to dissolve. There is also discipline in how you respond to discomfort. You will not always be comfortable. That is not the aim. The aim is not comfort. The aim is clarity of judgment under all conditions. When discomfort arises, observe whether you are making it larger through resistance. Often what disturbs you is not the situation itself, but your refusal to accept it as it is. Acceptance does not mean approval, it means accuracy. You see what is actually happening without exaggeration. That accuracy reduces internal friction, and reduced friction creates ease in expression. A person who practices this daily begins to carry himself differently without trying. The shoulders settle because they are no longer bracing against imagined threats. The jaw loosens because it is no longer preparing constant arguments. The eyes stabilize because they are no longer chasing approval in every direction. None of this is cosmetic. It is the byproduct of mental order. Discipline is not added to the face. It removes what distorts it. You will also notice something else. When discipline increases, neediness decreases, and neediness is one of the most visible forms of imbalance. It shows in how quickly someone seeks validation, how often they adjust themselves to be liked, how easily they abandon their own judgment for acceptance. A disciplined person does not abandon himself so easily. He can be alone without collapsing inward. He can be misunderstood without rushing to correct every perception. This steadiness is what others interpret as grounded presence. Even your simplest actions become part of this training. How you eat, how you walk, how you sit when no one is watching. If you act without awareness, you reinforce disorder. If you act with awareness, you reinforce discipline. The difference is not in the action itself, but in the governing mind behind it. A disciplined mind turns ordinary behavior into practice. An undisciplined mind turns even good intentions into noise. At some point, you must face a difficult truth. You have been negotiating with your impulses instead of governing them. You have been explaining your reactions instead of examining them. You have been living as if self-control were optional, something to be applied only when convenient. But nothing stable is built on convenience. Stability requires consistency under conditions that resist you. That resistance is not your enemy. It is the material of your training. The transformation you seek in appearance is not separate from this. A naturally attractive face is not constructed through effortful display. It emerges when effort is directed inward toward the regulation of thought and reaction. When judgment becomes clean, expression becomes steady. When impulse is questioned, movement becomes measured. When attention is trained, presence becomes strong. End your day with review, not comfort. Do not ask only what went well. Ask where you surrendered control of your judgment. Ask where you reacted without pause. Ask where you accepted a thought without testing it. Do not excuse it, observe it. Then decide how you will respond differently next time. This is how discipline accumulates, not in dramatic change, but in repeated correction. If you continue this practice, something subtle but undeniable begins to happen. People will notice you without understanding why. They will sense fewer contradictions in you. They will feel less volatility. They will interpret that as attractiveness, though what they are actually seeing is governance. A mind that governs itself produces a face that does not contradict itself. And once you have seen this clearly, you will no longer believe that beauty is separate from discipline. You will understand that every uncontrolled impulse leaves a trace, and every controlled impulse refines the whole. You will stop treating your reactions as harmless. You will start treating them as formative, and in that shift, you begin to build a presence that does not depend on approval, does not rely on performance, and does not fracture under pressure. What remains is simple: a mind that watches itself, a judgment that refuses haste, a life that does not bow to every impulse, and a face that carries, without exaggeration or distortion, the quiet evidence of inner order. Number 3. Calm eyes command quiet, deep respect. Stop letting your eyes betray your mind before you have even formed a thought. Look closely at yourself in any ordinary moment of tension, and you will see it clearly. Your eyes move faster than your reason. They search, they flinch, they avoid, they chase approval, they harden in judgment, and all of it happens before you choose anything. That is not freedom. That is a mind being dragged through the world by impulse, and nothing in a human being reveals inner disorder more quickly than unsettled eyes. The eyes are not just organs of sight. They are the first surface where your judgments become visible. Before you speak, before you act, before you even realize what you feel, your eyes have already announced your internal condition. Restless eyes expose restlessness of thought. Defensive eyes expose fear of correction. Searching eyes expose dependence on external approval. And scattered eyes expose a mind that has no governing principle strong enough to hold it still. You have likely mistaken this for personality. You tell yourself that this is just how you are, that you are observant, expressive, sensitive, or energetic. But discipline does not accept comforting labels. Discipline asks a harder question: are your eyes governed by reason or by reaction? Because a life without inner governance always leaks outward in visible ways, and nowhere is that leakage more obvious than in the gaze. The Stoic way of seeing begins before sight. It begins in judgment. Every time something appears before you, there is a split-second interpretation forming in your mind. You assign meaning before you verify truth. You assign importance before you examine necessity. You assign threat before you confirm reality. That is where chaos enters, not in the world, but in the speed of your interpretation. Calm eyes are not trained by controlling the muscles around them. They are trained by slowing down the judgment that drives them. If your mind is constantly concluding too quickly, your eyes will reflect that haste. They will dart toward confirmation. They will avoid discomfort. They will tighten when challenged. And people will not know why they feel unsettled around you, but they will feel it. They respond not to your appearance alone, but to the speed and stability of your inner evaluation of reality. Begin by recognizing this simple truth. You do not see the world as it is. You see the world as your judgments shape it in real time. The disciplined person does not eliminate judgment. He refines it. He pauses before accepting the first interpretation that appears. He asks whether it is necessary, whether it is accurate, whether it is distorted by desire or fear. That pause is invisible, but its effect is visible in the eyes. The gaze becomes steady because the mind is no longer jumping ahead of itself. Most people never notice how often they abandon calm perception in favor of emotional reaction. Someone looks at them in a certain way and they immediately assume disrespect. Someone speaks with silence and they assume rejection. Someone takes longer to respond and they assume disregard. None of this is seen clearly. It is interpreted through insecurity, and insecurity always speeds up perception. Calm perception slows it down. The first discipline is to stop letting assumptions become conclusions. When a judgment arises, do not immediately allow it to govern your attention. Hold it, examine it. Ask what evidence supports it and what evidence contradicts it. You will discover that most of what disturbs your eyes begins as untested belief. And untested belief always produces tension in the gaze because the mind is already defending something that may not even be true. Train yourself in the morning before the day begins to practice this restraint. Sit with your attention and anticipate the fact that your mind will produce rapid interpretations throughout the day. Decide in advance that you will not obey them immediately. You will observe them first. You will allow space between perception and conclusion. That space is where calmness is born. Without that space, your eyes will always be chasing the next reaction. Then carry this into real situations. When you look at another person, do not immediately evaluate them through preference or fear. Notice first what is actually present, not what your mind is adding. The disciplined gaze is not cold, it is accurate. It does not exaggerate threat or inflate importance. It sees proportion, and proportion is what produces quiet authority in the eyes. When someone meets that kind of gaze, they sense that nothing in you is being decided too quickly. That alone creates respect. Your eyes also reveal your dependence on outcomes. When you are attached to a result, your gaze becomes restless. It searches for confirmation of success. It scans others for approval. It checks reactions constantly. This is not perception. This is anxiety disguised as observation. The Stoic removes this dependency by separating what is under control from what is not. The outcome is never fully yours. Your judgment, your effort, your choice of response, these are yours. When you internalize this separation, your eyes stop chasing outcomes they cannot guarantee. Watch how often your gaze shifts when you are seeking validation. It becomes unstable because it is waiting for something outside your control to stabilize your inner state. But nothing outside you can perform that function. So the search continues endlessly, and the eyes reflect that endless searching. Calm eyes emerge when you stop outsourcing your inner stability. There is also discipline in how you handle discomfort in social presence. When silence appears between you and another person, observe your reaction. Do you feel the need to fill it immediately? Do your eyes start moving to escape the moment? That impulse is not communication, it is avoidance. A disciplined mind does not escape silence, it remains present in it. The eyes, in that state, become anchored rather than reactive. They no longer flee from stillness, they rest within it. Another practice is to deliberately slow your visual attention during moments of emotional intensity. When something provokes you, do not let your eyes narrow into immediate judgment. Relax them, breathe. Let the first wave of interpretation pass before responding. This is not suppression. This is governance. You are training yourself not to be ruled by first impressions. Most errors in judgment come from obedience to the first impression. Over time, this changes how others experience your presence. They begin to feel that you are not easily manipulated by surface appearances. They sense that your attention is deliberate rather than compulsive. They notice that you are not easily drawn into reactionary agreement or disagreement. This produces a kind of quiet respect, not because you are performing authority, but because you are not leaking instability. Do not mistake calm eyes for emotional absence. A disciplined person still feels, but feeling does not immediately become action. Feeling passes through examination. That examination filters what is useful from what is distorted. What remains is clarity, and clarity does not rush. It does not exaggerate. It does not contract or scatter. It holds steady, even in the presence of strong emotion. You must also confront how often your eyes are trained outward for comparison. You look at others and measure yourself unconsciously. This comparison destabilizes attention. It pulls the gaze into judgment loops that are not productive. The Stoic removes comparison as a governing principle. You observe others without using them as measurement against your own worth. Worth is not assigned by comparison. It is assigned by alignment with reason and action. At midday, practice a brief internal check. Ask whether your attention has been governed by reaction or by reason. Notice where your gaze has gone without intention. Notice whether you have been scanning for validation, approval, or threat. Then correct it. Bring it back to clarity. This repeated correction is what stabilizes the eyes over time. Not effortful control, but consistent realignment. Even fatigue plays a role in how your eyes behave. An undisciplined mind uses tiredness as excuse for mental collapse. It allows irritation, impatience, and distortion to enter more easily when energy is low. A disciplined mind does not surrender governance when tired. It simply reduces unnecessary engagement and maintains clarity in essential judgment. The eyes reflect this consistency. They do not become erratic simply because energy is lower. At the end of the day, examine how your perception has shifted throughout different moments. Where did your eyes become reactive? Where did they become calm? Where did judgment precede understanding? Where did understanding precede judgment? Do not judge yourself harshly in this review. Observe patterns. The purpose is not guilt. The purpose is precision. Precision leads to correction. Correction leads to stability. Stability leads to calm presence. If you continue this discipline, something subtle will begin to change in how others respond to you. They will not feel that they must compete with your attention. They will not feel judged too quickly. They will not feel rushed. Instead, they will feel that your presence is steady enough to hold reality without distortion. That steadiness is what people interpret as depth, and depth is what quiet respect is built upon. The final truth is simple. Calm eyes are not created by appearance training. They are created by mental restraint. Every time you slow your judgment, you stabilize your gaze. Every time you refuse premature conclusion, you reduce internal movement. Every time you separate perception from reaction, you restore clarity, and clarity sustained over time becomes visible without effort. What remains in the end is a person who does not look at the world as a series of threats and validations, but as something to be understood with measured attention. A person whose eyes do not chase meaning, but reveal that meaning has already been examined. A person whose gaze does not demand respect, but naturally receives it because it is free from chaos. Number 4. Confidence grows through inner self-mastery. You keep calling it confidence, but what you are actually experiencing most days is hesitation wearing a disguise. A mind that depends on external approval will always feel unstable, no matter how carefully it is presented. It waits for signals from others before it decides how to stand, how to speak, how to behave. That is not confidence, that is dependence, and dependence is always fragile because it is built on what you cannot control. True confidence does not begin in how others see you. It begins in how clearly you govern yourself when no one is confirming your worth. When there is no audience, no feedback, no reassurance, what remains of you determines everything. If your thoughts become scattered in private, your presence will be unstable in public. If your judgments are uncontrolled in solitude, your expression will be uncertain in society. Nothing you perform outwardly can correct what you refuse to discipline inwardly. You have likely mistaken comfort for stability. When things feel easy, you assume you are steady. When things feel difficult, you assume you are weak. But Stoic discipline does not measure character by comfort. It measures it by governance under pressure. Anyone can appear composed when nothing challenges them. The real measure appears when expectations are disrupted, when outcomes resist your preference, when people do not respond as you hoped. In those moments, your mind reveals whether it is ruled or ruling. Most suffering does not come from external events. It comes from untrained judgment reacting too quickly to those events. You decide too fast what something means about you. You decide too fast whether something is good or bad. You decide too fast whether you are respected or ignored, valued or dismissed. That speed of judgment creates instability, and instability inside always feels like lack of confidence outside. Self-mastery begins when you stop trusting every interpretation your mind produces. Your thoughts are not commands, they are events that require inspection. A disciplined person does not collapse into agreement with every internal conclusion. He examines it. He asks whether it reflects reality or fear, reason or impulse, truth or assumption. That moment of examination is where authority is reclaimed. Begin your morning by confronting this reality directly. Before you enter the demands of the day, recognize that your mind will attempt to persuade you of many things that are not true. It will suggest that certain outcomes define your worth. It will suggest that other people's reactions determine your value. It will suggest that discomfort means failure. Do not accept these suggestions automatically. Decide in advance that you will question them. This single decision changes the entire structure of your inner life. Self-mastery is not control over the world. It is control over agreement. You choose what you accept as true. You choose what you allow to shape your behavior. Most people never realize how often they unconsciously accept false judgments. They feel something strongly and immediately treat it as fact. But feeling is not verification. Feeling is only signal. Reason is what must interpret it. When you begin practicing this separation, something fundamental shifts. You stop being pushed around by every internal movement. A thought arises, and instead of obeying it, you pause. You examine it. You decide whether it deserves action or dismissal. That pause is not small. It is the difference between reaction and mastery, and confidence grows in that space, not in the reaction itself. Notice how often your insecurity is created by imagined outcomes. You anticipate rejection before it happens. You assume failure before action is complete. You project judgment from others before they have even spoken. These are not truths, they are mental projections. And when you live inside projections, your behavior becomes cautious, fragmented, and uncertain. Confidence cannot exist in a mind that is constantly negotiating with imagined threats. The Stoic approach removes imagination from authority. It does not eliminate imagination. It subordinates it to reason. You acknowledge what is real, what is present, what is within your control, and you refuse to build identity on what has not occurred. That discipline immediately reduces unnecessary fear, and when fear reduces, clarity increases, and when clarity increases, action becomes steadier. Confidence is not a feeling you wait for. It is a result of repeated alignment with what is under your control. Your judgments, your choices, your attention, your effort, your restraint in reaction, these are the domain of your responsibility. When you govern these consistently, confidence becomes unavoidable because you are no longer outsourcing your stability to uncertain outcomes. During the day, observe how quickly your mind tries to escape responsibility. When something goes wrong, it searches for external blame. When something feels uncomfortable, it searches for avoidance. When something requires effort, it searches for delay. These impulses weaken self-trust, and without self-trust, confidence collapses. Self-mastery restores self-trust because it replaces impulse with deliberate action. Practice deliberately delaying reaction. When you feel the urge to respond emotionally, wait, not indefinitely, but long enough to regain clarity. In that pause, remind yourself that you are not required to obey the first impulse that appears. You are required to examine it. That simple shift builds inner authority, and inner authority is what others perceive as confidence. Another practice is to review your assumptions throughout the day. Notice where you assumed something about yourself or others without evidence. You will find many of these assumptions are based on insecurity rather than reality. Correcting them in real time trains your mind to value accuracy over emotion. And a mind that values accuracy does not fluctuate easily under pressure. Self-mastery also requires honesty about your own tendencies. You must see where you exaggerate problems, where you avoid discomfort, where you seek validation too quickly. Without this honesty, discipline becomes performance rather than transformation. The Stoic does not flatter himself. He observes himself. That observation is not emotional. It is precise, and precision removes distortion. There is a point where you will notice something subtle. Situations that once felt intimidating begin to feel simpler, not because they have changed, but because your interpretation of them has changed. You are no longer adding unnecessary meaning to events. You are seeing them as they are, not as your fear presents them. That reduction of distortion is what people recognize as calm confidence. Even your posture and expression begin to reflect this shift, not because you are trying to appear confident, but because you are no longer internally divided. Division creates tension. Agreement between reason and action creates ease. When you are not arguing internally with every situation, your body stops carrying that conflict outwardly. You must also understand that confidence is not proven in success. It is proven in conduct regardless of success. A person who acts with discipline under uncertainty, who maintains clarity under pressure, who refuses to abandon reason under disappointment, demonstrates self-mastery. And that demonstration is the foundation of genuine confidence. At the end of the day, examine not your outcomes, but your governance. Did you allow impulse to override reason? Did you accept unverified judgments? Did you react faster than you reflected? Did you surrender to imagined fears? This review is not punishment. It is calibration. Without calibration, the mind drifts. With calibration, it stabilizes. If you continue this practice, you will notice that confidence stops being something you try to generate. It becomes something that naturally follows disciplined living. You no longer need to convince yourself of your worth in each situation because your actions already reflect alignment with reason. And reason, consistently applied, produces stability. What remains is not a personality built on performance, but a mind that governs itself regardless of circumstance. And that is the only foundation strong enough to carry real confidence. Number 5. Simplicity makes beauty timeless and powerful. You keep surrounding yourself with excess and calling it expression, but look closely and you will see something more honest underneath it. The mind that cannot settle for simplicity is a mind that does not trust itself. It piles, it adds, it adjusts, it modifies endlessly because it fears that what remains after stripping away the unnecessary will not be enough. That fear is the root of disorder, and disorder always shows itself not only in life choices but in how a person appears, moves, and carries presence. Simplicity is not absence, it is removal of distortion. It is what remains when you stop trying to decorate insecurity. A person who depends on excess is always negotiating with how he will be seen. He adjusts constantly, not because reality demands it, but because his mind is unsettled. And an unsettled mind produces an unsettled presence. No matter how refined the surface appears, the inner confusion leaks through. You have already experienced this in others. A person speaks too much, tries too hard, adds unnecessary explanation, fills silence as if silence is danger, and immediately something in their presence becomes heavy, not because they lack talent, but because they lack restraint. Excess is not strength, it is the signal of inner instability, and when you live in excess, you train your mind to believe that more is always necessary, more words, more reactions, more validation, more interpretation. But the Stoic understands that clarity lives in reduction. Your suffering often comes from complication you did not need to create. You turn simple situations into layered emotional conflicts. You assign meanings that were never there. You expand small disturbances into long internal narratives, and in doing so, you exhaust your own attention. A mind that multiplies interpretations loses contact with reality. And when you lose contact with reality, even beauty becomes unstable because you no longer see things as they are, only as you project them. Simplicity begins when you stop adding unnecessary judgment to what is already clear. A situation occurs, that is fact. Everything added after that is interpretation. Most of your internal struggle is not about the event itself, but about the interpretations you refuse to question. The Stoic practice is to strip those additions away, not by denial, but by inspection. Ask what is real, what is assumed, what is exaggerated, what is useful. The moment you remove distortion, what remains is simpler, and what is simple is easier to govern. Begin your morning with the discipline of reduction. Before the day fills your mind with noise, decide that you will not complicate what is straightforward. Decide that you will not multiply emotional narratives beyond necessity. Decide that you will treat each situation as it appears, not as your imagination expands it. This is not limitation, it is clarity. And clarity is the foundation of stable presence. Notice how quickly the mind resists simplicity. It wants elaboration, it wants explanation, it wants to justify reactions, to analyze endlessly, to predict outcomes that are not present. But none of this increases control, it only increases confusion. The disciplined mind interrupts this process early. It refuses to let interpretation spiral into fiction. It returns repeatedly to what is known, what is observable, what is within control. When you simplify your thinking, your reactions become lighter. You are no longer burdened by unnecessary meaning. Someone speaks to you sharply, and instead of constructing a story about their intent, you observe the fact of their words and choose your response with clarity. Someone ignores you, and instead of building emotional narrative around rejection, you recognize the limits of your control over others. In both cases, simplicity prevents suffering from expanding beyond what is real. You must also examine how complexity serves ego. The mind often complicates situations to justify emotional reactions. It creates layers of reasoning to defend anger. insecurity, or pride. But these layers are not truth. They are protection of instability. The Stoic removes this protection not to expose vulnerability for its own sake, but to restore accuracy. A simple judgment is often a more honest one than a complex justification built after the fact. There is discipline in how you speak as well. Excess words are often the result of internal uncertainty. When you are not clear internally, you try to stabilize yourself externally through explanation. But clarity does not require constant reinforcement. A disciplined person speaks when necessary, and when he speaks, he does not inflate. He does not multiply points unnecessarily. He does not disguise insecurity in elaboration. He chooses precision over volume. Practice this in conversation. Before speaking, ask whether your words add clarity or add noise. If they add noise, withhold them. You will notice that restraint in speech immediately changes the quality of your presence. People begin to sense that you are not driven by impulse to fill space. They sense that your words are selected, not spilled. That perception is not created by intention, it is created by discipline. Simplicity also governs desire. The mind that wants too much becomes internally chaotic. It constantly shifts attention between competing wants, none of which it fully controls. The Stoic reduces desire to what is essential and within reason, not because life must be minimal, but because attention must be stable. When desire is scattered, attention is scattered. When attention is scattered, presence weakens, and when presence weakens, everything you do loses depth. You can observe this in daily life. When your mind is divided between multiple unnecessary concerns, your expression becomes restless. Your movements become less grounded, your perception becomes less sharp. But when you reduce what you mentally chase, your entire system becomes more composed. Simplicity of desire produces simplicity of being. During the day, practice returning to essential perception. When something happens, strip it down mentally to what is actually present. Remove interpretation that is not required for action. Ask what is necessary to respond effectively and nothing more. This prevents emotional inflation. It keeps your attention aligned with reality rather than narrative. Another discipline is reducing your attachment to outcomes. Much of mental complexity comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. You imagine scenarios, you simulate futures, you rehearse outcomes in your mind as if repetition will guarantee certainty. But certainty does not come from mental rehearsal. It comes from acceptance of limits. You act where you can act, and you release what is not yours to decide. This separation simplifies life immediately. The more you practice this, the more you will notice a change in how you appear to yourself. Not in appearance alone, but in internal experience. There is less internal noise, fewer competing interpretations, less emotional layering over simple events. This reduction is not emptiness, it is order, and order is what makes presence stable and enduring. At the end of the day, reflect not on how much you experienced, but on how much unnecessary complexity you allowed to enter your mind. Where did you overthink? Where did you overreact internally to simple events? Where did you add meaning that was not present? Do not judge yourself emotionally in this review. Observe precisely. Precision leads to correction. Correction leads to refinement. If you continue this discipline, something becomes evident over time. Your presence becomes easier to be around, not because you are performing simplicity, but because you are no longer internally fragmented. People experience that as calmness, but it is actually reduction of unnecessary inner movement. They feel that you are not inflating reality beyond what it is. That stability reads as quiet strength. In the end, simplicity is not aesthetic. It is governance. It is the refusal to let the mind complicate what reason has already made clear. It is the removal of excess interpretation, excess reaction, excess desire, and excess speech. What remains is a mind that sees directly, responds directly, and does not interfere with reality by adding unnecessary layers to it. And that is where lasting presence comes from. Not from accumulation, but from removal. Not from addition, but from discipline. Not from excess, but from simplicity that has been tested, refined, and chosen again and again until nothing unnecessary remains in the way of clarity. Number 6. Strong posture reveals noble inner character. You think posture is about appearance, but what you are really exposing every moment is the state of your inner governance. The body does not lie in long-term habits. It reveals what the mind repeatedly allows. A collapsed posture is never only physical weakness. It is the outward trace of a mind that has stopped holding itself accountable. A rigid posture is never only physical strength. It is the reflection of a mind that has learned not to abandon itself under pressure. Look at yourself when no one is watching. Not when you are posing, not when you are aware of a camera, not when you are trying to appear composed. Look at how your body behaves in private moments of fatigue, disappointment, or distraction. The shoulders drop, not only from tiredness, but from unchallenged resignation. The spine bends not only from comfort, but from habitual surrender to mental noise. The body follows the mind that is not being governed. You are not only shaped by events, you are shaped by your response to events that you never examine. Each time you accept an unchallenged thought like "this is too much" or "I cannot deal with this," your body learns that language. It begins to mirror that conclusion. Over time, those conclusions become posture, and posture becomes visible philosophy. The Stoic does not separate physical form from mental discipline. They are one system. When your judgment weakens, your structure weakens. When your attention scatters, your presence collapses inward. When you abandon reason, even briefly, your body reflects that abandonment. That is why posture is not cosmetic. It is ethical expression. It shows whether you are still standing within your own judgment or whether you have drifted into passive reaction. Most people never notice how often they yield internally throughout the day. A situation becomes uncomfortable and they mentally withdraw. A conversation becomes difficult and they internally shrink. A responsibility feels heavy and they subtly collapse into avoidance. None of this is dramatic. It is quiet surrender. But repeated surrender becomes structure, and structure becomes visible in the way you hold yourself. Strong posture begins when you stop abandoning yourself in thought. When a challenge appears, do not immediately interpret it as burden. Do not allow the first impulse of resistance to define your internal stance. Instead, pause and separate fact from judgment. The fact is what is happening. The judgment is what you are adding to it. Most collapse begins with accepting the judgment as truth without inspection. You must learn to interrupt this process, not once but repeatedly. When discomfort arises, hold your attention steady long enough to observe your interpretation before acting on it. Ask whether it is accurate or inflated, whether it is necessary or emotional. This is not mental theory. It is practical discipline that directly affects how you inhabit your body in that moment. A person who constantly yields to internal resistance develops a body that reflects yielding. The chest narrows because attention contracts. The neck weakens because awareness drops forward into anxiety. The back loses alignment because the mind stops holding steady structure. None of this is accidental. It is accumulated behavior expressed physically. When you begin to practice inner resistance against unnecessary mental surrender, the body begins to reorganize itself. Not because you are forcing it into shape, but because you are no longer feeding collapse from within. The spine naturally returns towards stability when the mind stops feeding defeat into every situation it encounters. Start your morning by setting a clear internal stance before you engage with the world. Decide that you will not interpret difficulty as collapse. Decide that you will not treat discomfort as instruction to withdraw. Decide that you will remain aligned with reason even when emotion attempts to distort your perception. This is not optimism, it is governance. Throughout the day, check whether your attention is folded inward or extended outward. When the mind turns inward excessively, it often becomes self-defeating. It overanalyzes, overreacts, and compresses your presence. When attention is governed by reason, it remains outwardly aware and structurally steady. Posture follows this distribution of attention. A scattered mind collapses the body inward. The governed mind maintains openness without tension. You must also examine how often you physically express psychological resistance. Slouching is not always fatigue. It is often quiet disagreement with reality. Tight shoulders are not always physical strain. They are often mental refusal to accept what is already present. A Stoic does not allow resistance to accumulate unnoticed. He identifies it at the level of judgment before it becomes structure. When you sit, stand, or move, observe whether your body is reflecting acceptance or resistance. Acceptance here does not mean approval of everything. It means clarity of perception without distortion. A clear mind does not collapse under truth. It aligns with it. A confused mind resists what it cannot change and collapses under that resistance. Practice small corrections throughout the day. When you notice your posture weakening, do not react with frustration. Simply realign. Not as performance, but as reminder of inner order. Each correction is a return to governance. Each return strengthens the connection between judgment and structure. Over time, posture becomes less about effort and more about stability. You will also notice that posture affects perception. When your body is aligned, your mind interprets challenges differently. You see more clearly, react less impulsively, and maintain steadier attention. This is because the body and mind are not separate systems. They reinforce each other continuously. A disciplined posture supports disciplined judgment. A collapsed posture invites distorted interpretation. There is also a deeper dimension. When you stand or sit with alignment, you are practicing refusal of internal defeat. You are declaring through structure that you are not yielding to impulse. That declaration is not for others. It is for your own judgment system. You are teaching yourself, repeatedly, that collapse is not the default response to pressure. At midday, pause and scan your body honestly. Notice where tension has accumulated. Notice where structure has weakened. Then trace it back not only to physical cause, but to mental cause. What judgment preceded this collapse? What interpretation created this contraction? This investigation is essential. Without it, posture becomes accidental. With it, posture becomes conscious discipline. Do not allow yourself to believe that physical alignment can be separated from mental clarity. The attempt to fix posture without addressing judgment is superficial. It creates temporary correction without inner change. True transformation comes when you stop allowing unexamined thoughts to dictate physical expression. As the day progresses, maintain awareness of how external pressures attempt to influence your structure. People may interrupt, situations may shift, expectations may increase. None of this requires internal collapse. You can respond while remaining aligned. You can adapt without surrendering structure. This is the essence of inner strength expressed physically. At the end of the day, review not only your actions but your form throughout those actions. Where did you maintain alignment under pressure? Where did you collapse without awareness? Where did your posture reflect clarity? And where did it reflect reaction? Do not interpret this review emotionally. Treat it as data. Precision leads to correction. Correction leads to stability. If you continue this practice, something becomes visible over time. Your presence begins to feel more grounded even before you speak. People respond not only to your words but to the steadiness of your physical structure. They sense that you are not internally fragmented. That perception is not created by intention. It is created by repeated alignment between judgment and body. In the end, strong posture is not about appearance. It is about refusal to abandon yourself in thought. It is the physical signature of a mind that remains governed under pressure, that does not collapse into impulse, and that maintains clarity even in discomfort. And when that becomes your default state, your presence carries a weight that does not need explanation. Number 7. Controlled emotions create lasting magnetic charm. You keep believing that emotions are something that happen to you, as if you are only the place where they arrive, not the one who can govern them. That belief is exactly why your inner life feels unstable. A mind that treats every emotion as instruction becomes a mind that is constantly pulled in different directions, and nothing in such a person remains steady long enough to create presence. What people call magnetic charm is not emotional intensity, it is emotional governance. Look closely at your reactions across a normal day. A small delay creates irritation, a small disagreement creates tension, a small misunderstanding creates defensiveness. None of these events are powerful on their own. What gives them weight is your unexamined interpretation. You take a passing impression and you allow it to become a ruling force. That is not emotional depth, that is lack of discipline in judgment. The Stoic mind does not deny emotion. It refuses to obey emotion without inspection. There is a difference between experiencing a feeling and surrendering authority to it. Most people never separate the two. They feel anger and become anger. They feel fear and become fear. They feel desire and become pursuit. In that collapse of distance between feeling and identity, they lose control of themselves without noticing it. Controlled emotion is not suppression. It is governance through reason. It is the ability to hold feeling in awareness without letting it dictate action. A feeling arises, and instead of immediate expression, there is examination. What is this feeling based on? Is it accurate? Is it useful? Does it deserve expression or correction? That moment of examination is where emotional discipline begins. You have likely mistaken emotional reactivity for authenticity. You think that expressing everything immediately is being real, but unchecked expression is not honesty. It is impulsivity without reflection. A person who expresses every internal movement has not learned to govern his inner world. And without governance, emotional life becomes chaotic, not truthful. Magnetic presence does not come from intensity. It comes from stability under emotional pressure. When others feel that you are not easily pulled into reaction, they experience a kind of trust. They sense that your inner world is not ruled by every passing disturbance. That steadiness is what draws attention more than emotional display ever could. But to reach that state, you must confront your habit of immediate emotional acceptance. When something happens, your mind produces an interpretation, and emotion follows instantly. You then assume the interpretation is true because the emotion feels real. This is where most distortion begins. The Stoic practice is to separate interpretation from fact and emotion from judgment, not to deny emotion, but to prevent it from becoming authority. Begin in the morning by preparing your mind for this separation. Do not assume that your first emotional response will be correct. Decide in advance that you will question it. This removes automatic obedience. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, reason regains its role as guide. Throughout the day, observe how often your emotional state shifts based on external conditions. Someone's tone changes and your mood follows. An outcome fluctuates and your internal stability shifts with it. This dependence on external movement is what weakens emotional governance. A disciplined mind does not allow external events to directly determine internal state. It processes them through reason first. This does not mean indifference. It means responsibility for your own judgments. You are not responsible for what happens externally. You are responsible for how you interpret it and how you respond. That distinction is essential. Without it, you become reactive to everything. With it, you become selective in response. When strong emotion arises, do not suppress it and do not immediately act on it. Pause, observe it, name it internally without exaggeration. This simple act of recognition reduces its intensity, not because you are fighting it, but because you are no longer merging with it. Distance creates clarity, and clarity reduces emotional distortion. You must also learn to question emotional narratives. Anger often carries a story of injustice. Fear often carries a story of loss. Desire often carries a story of necessity. But stories produced under emotional pressure are not reliable. They exaggerate, simplify, or distort reality to match feeling. The Stoic does not accept these narratives without examination. He checks them against reason and evidence. This practice gradually changes how emotions move through you. Instead of immediate escalation, there is slower processing. Instead of automatic reaction, there is measured response. Instead of emotional domination, there is emotional awareness. Over time, this creates a presence that feels controlled not by force, but by understanding. Controlled emotion also affects how others experience you. When people cannot easily predict your reactions, they become more attentive in your presence, not because you are unpredictable in a chaotic way, but because you are not mechanically reactive. You are not easily manipulated by tone, pressure, or expectation. That stability creates a quiet form of respect. But this stability cannot be performed. It must be practiced in private moments where no one is watching your reactions, in frustration, in disappointment, in small annoyances that no one else sees. This is where emotional governance is trained. Each moment is a choice between reaction and reason, and each choice strengthens or weakens your internal authority. During the day, when emotion rises, ask a simple question before acting. Is this necessary or merely compelling? Many emotional responses feel urgent but are not necessary. Urgency is not truth. It is intensity, and intensity without reason is unreliable. The Stoic does not confuse urgency with importance. You must also be honest about emotional habits. Some emotions are repeatedly indulged because they feel justified. Resentment feels justified. Pride feels justified. Anxiety feels protective. But justification does not equal truth. A feeling can feel justified and still distort reality. Recognizing this removes the automatic trust you give to emotional patterns. At midday, take a brief internal check. Observe where emotion has influenced your perception. Did irritation make something appear larger than it was? Did fear narrow your thinking? Did desire distort your judgment? This review is not about judgment of yourself. It is about clarity of mechanism. Once you see how emotion alters perception, you stop treating it as final authority. As the day continues, practice returning to reason repeatedly, not once, but many times. Each return is a correction of drift. Emotional life naturally drifts toward reaction. Reason restores direction. This repeated correction is what builds stability, not perfection, but consistent return. You will notice over time that emotional intensity begins to lose its control over you, not because emotions disappear, but because they no longer dictate your identity or actions. You begin to feel without being governed by feeling. You begin to observe without collapsing into what you observe. This separation is where real inner strength forms. At the end of the day, reflect on your emotional governance. Where did you react without examination? Where did you pause and choose response? Where did emotion lead judgment instead of reason? This reflection is not about regret, it is about refinement. Each awareness becomes preparation for better control tomorrow. If you continue this discipline, something changes in how others perceive you. They no longer feel that they must manage your reactions. They no longer feel that your emotional state is unpredictable or overwhelming. Instead, they feel steadiness, and that steadiness becomes attractive because it is rare. In the end, controlled emotion is not emotional absence, it is emotional clarity governed by reason. It is the refusal to let impulse decide your identity. It is the practice of holding feeling without being held by it. And when that becomes your habit, your presence stops being driven by reaction and starts being defined by quiet authority that does not need to announce itself. Number 8. Wisdom enhances beauty beyond physical appearance. You keep measuring yourself through surfaces and then wondering why the feeling of inadequacy never stays quiet for long. That instability is not created by your appearance, it is created by your judgment of appearance. A mind that constantly evaluates itself through external comparison will never settle into clarity. And without clarity, no form of beauty can feel stable, because the observer is unsettled even when the form is unchanged. Wisdom begins where comparison ends, not because others are irrelevant, but because your value cannot be extracted from contrast. When you measure yourself against shifting standards outside your control, your mind becomes dependent on things that cannot stabilize it. Approval changes, trends change, attention changes, but reason does not change its requirement that you govern what is yours and release what is not. You are not suffering because you lack qualities. You are suffering because you misjudge what those qualities mean. You assume that worth is assigned externally, when in reality worth is reflected in how you use your own judgment. A person who does not examine his thoughts will always feel inferior to the world, because he has handed authority over his self-perception to unstable conditions. Wisdom is the correction of this mistake. It is not accumulation of information, it is the ability to see clearly what is within your control and what is not, and then to act only within the boundary of control. Most inner suffering comes from violating this boundary repeatedly without awareness. You attempt to control perception, outcome, and reaction from others, and when that fails, you interpret the failure as personal deficiency. That interpretation is false. It is the result of misplaced control. Begin your morning with a deliberate separation. Before you engage with the world, identify what belongs to you. Your judgment, your intention, your response, your attention. These are yours. Everything else is not. The moment you forget this distinction, you begin to build identity on unstable ground. Wisdom restores this distinction every day without exception. When you move through your day without this clarity, your mind begins to overextend itself. You interpret silence as rejection. You interpret neutrality as disapproval. You interpret difference as threat. None of these interpretations are facts. They are projections created by a mind that has not anchored itself in reason, and projection always distorts perception. A distorted mind cannot experience stable presence because it is always reacting to what is not actually there. Wisdom corrects projection by slowing judgment. Before accepting an interpretation, you pause. You ask whether it is necessary, whether it is supported by evidence, whether it is influenced by fear or desire. Most judgments collapse under this examination. What remains is often simpler, less emotional, and more accurate. That simplicity is not loss of meaning. It is recovery of reality. You have likely experienced how quickly your mood shifts based on interpretation rather than fact. A situation does not change, but your perception of it changes, and your emotional state follows that perception. This reveals the fragility of unexamined judgment. Wisdom stabilizes this process by inserting reason between perception and reaction. Without that insertion, you are governed by automatic interpretation. There is also a subtle form of self-distortion that occurs when you attach identity to outcomes you cannot fully control. When success becomes a measure of worth rather than a result of action, your mind becomes unstable in the presence of uncertainty. Every variable outside your control becomes a threat to your identity. This is not strength. It is dependency on conditions that cannot be guaranteed. Wisdom removes this dependency by returning focus to action rather than outcome. You govern effort, not result. You govern attention, not reception. You govern intention, not external judgment. When this separation becomes habitual, your internal state becomes less reactive to external fluctuation, and in that stability, presence becomes more grounded. You must also confront how often you allow external validation to define internal clarity. When others approve, you feel correct. When others disapprove, you feel uncertain. This creates a mind that has no stable reference point. Wisdom replaces this external reference with internal examination. You evaluate your actions based on alignment with reason, not approval. Throughout the day, observe where your mind seeks confirmation from outside itself. Notice when you adjust your behavior to maintain perception rather than truth. Each time you do this unconsciously, you weaken your internal authority. Wisdom restores that authority by requiring conscious evaluation before adjustment. Not rigidity, but awareness. Wisdom also exposes how complaint distorts perception. When you complain mentally or verbally about circumstances, you are not describing reality accurately, you are adding resistance to it. That resistance does not change the situation, it only distorts your interpretation of it. A mind that complains frequently becomes unable to see clearly because it is constantly adding emotional noise to simple events. The Stoic approach is not silence for its own sake, it is removal of distortion. When you remove complaint, you do not lose awareness of difficulty. You gain clarity about what is actually present versus what is emotionally added. That clarity is what allows appropriate response. Without it, reaction replaces action. You must also examine how often your thoughts about yourself are unverified. You assume you are less capable, less attractive, less competent, or less valued based on incomplete interpretations. These assumptions are not truths. They are judgments that have not been tested. Wisdom requires testing. Without testing, judgment becomes belief, and untested belief becomes limitation. During midday reflection, pause and review where your thinking has drifted into assumption. Identify where you accepted conclusions without evidence, then correct them not emotionally, but logically. Replace assumption with observation. Replace interpretation with fact. This practice slowly removes unnecessary self-criticism and unnecessary self-inflation, both of which distort perception. As your judgment becomes more accurate, something subtle changes in how you experience yourself. You become less dependent on external feedback to feel stable. You begin to trust your own evaluation because it is no longer driven by impulse, it is guided by reason. That trust is the foundation of inner steadiness. Wisdom does not make you indifferent to life. It makes you precise in how you engage with it. You no longer waste energy reacting to imagined meanings. You respond to what is actually present. This precision reduces emotional volatility, and reduced volatility creates a kind of presence that feels grounded without effort. You will notice that as this discipline deepens, your concern shifts away from how you are perceived and toward how accurately you are perceiving. That shift is fundamental. It replaces self-consciousness with clarity. It replaces insecurity with examination. It replaces reactive identity with governed awareness. At the end of the day, examine your judgments again, not your outcomes, but your thinking. Where did you assume without evidence? Where did you react without examination? Where did you allow comparison to distort perception? This review is not criticism, it is correction. And correction is how wisdom is trained into habit. If you continue this practice, something becomes evident. External conditions lose their authority over your sense of worth, not because they no longer matter, but because they no longer define you. Your stability comes from the quality of your judgment, not the fluctuation of external validation. That is where real dignity forms. Wisdom enhances presence not by changing how you appear, but by changing how clearly you see. And when your seeing becomes clear, your thinking becomes steady. And when your thinking becomes steady, your presence becomes naturally composed without effort or performance. Number 9. Self-respect makes your energy irresistible. You keep searching for energy outside yourself, as if it can be borrowed from attention, approval, or the shifting moods of other people. But what you call energy in others is often nothing more than self-respect made visible. And what you call lack of energy in yourself is often the quiet erosion of your own standards, repeated so many times that you no longer notice it happening. Self-respect is not a feeling, it is a practice of refusal. It is the refusal to betray your own judgment just to avoid discomfort. It is the refusal to speak in ways that contradict your understanding just to be liked. It is the refusal to act against your own principles just to secure temporary approval. When these refusals are absent, something inside you weakens, not dramatically but gradually, and that gradual weakening is what people sense before you even speak. You already know this from experience, even if you have never named it clearly. There are moments when you act in full alignment with what you know is right, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is misunderstood. In those moments, your presence changes. You become steadier, less dependent, less reactive. People respond differently, not because you are performing confidence, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself in real time. And there are other moments when you compromise your own judgment. You agree when you do not agree. You stay silent when clarity is needed. You accept treatment that contradicts your own understanding of dignity. In those moments, something in your presence contracts, not because others changed, but because you stepped away from your own standard. That internal step back is what weakens your energy. The Stoic understanding is simple. Energy is not generated by effortful display, it is generated by alignment. When your thoughts, judgments, and actions are aligned with reason, there is no internal conflict draining you. But when you act against your own understanding, even slightly, you create internal division, and division is exhausting. Exhaustion is not always physical. It is often moral inconsistency repeated over time. Self-respect begins with observation of this division. You must learn to notice when your actions are guided by approval-seeking rather than reason, not after the fact in regret, but in real time, at the moment of decision. That moment is where your future presence is being formed. Every time you override your own clarity to avoid discomfort, you weaken your ability to trust yourself. You have likely mistaken approval for safety. When others respond positively, you feel temporarily stable. When others withdraw approval, you feel uncertain. But this is not stability. It is dependence on conditions outside your control. And anything dependent on external conditions cannot produce lasting strength. Self-respect removes this dependence by shifting authority inward. Begin your morning by setting a standard for how you will treat your own judgment throughout the day. Not as something to be overridden, but as something to be examined carefully and then followed when it aligns with reason. This distinction is essential. Self-respect is not stubbornness. It is fidelity to what has been clearly understood after examination. As you move through the day, you will encounter small moments where your principles are tested. not in dramatic situations, but in subtle ones. A chance to exaggerate a story to gain approval, a chance to stay silent when truth would bring discomfort, a chance to agree for convenience rather than accuracy. These are the exact points where self-respect is either strengthened or weakened. Most people underestimate these moments because they seem small. But the mind does not distinguish between large and small betrayals of principle. Each one teaches the same lesson. Your judgment is optional. And once the mind learns that your own judgment is optional, confidence dissolves, because you no longer trust your own authority. Self-respect restores that authority. It tells the mind that your judgment is not negotiable once it has been examined and confirmed as reasonable. This does not mean refusing correction. It means refusing self-betrayal. You remain open to truth, but closed to impulsive abandonment of what you know to be aligned with reason. You must also confront how often you allow emotional discomfort to override rational clarity. When something feels awkward, you abandon your position. When something feels uncertain, you retreat. When something feels challenging, you compromise. But discomfort is not a signal of wrongness. It is often a signal of growth or resistance to habit. Self-respect requires you to distinguish between emotional discomfort and rational error. Throughout the day, practice pausing before making concessions that contradict your understanding. Ask whether you are adjusting your behavior because it is reasonable or because it is easier. This distinction reveals whether you are acting from self-respect or from avoidance of tension. Avoidance weakens presence. Alignment strengthens it. There is also a deeper form of self-respect that involves how you treat your own attention. When you allow your mind to drift constantly into distraction, comparison, and unnecessary reaction, you are not respecting your own mental life. Attention is the foundation of perception. When it is scattered, your perception becomes unreliable. And unreliable perception leads to unstable decisions. The disciplined mind protects attention as something valuable, not rigidly but intentionally. It returns repeatedly to what is necessary rather than what is merely stimulating. This return is a form of self-respect because it acknowledges that your mind is worth governing carefully, not leaving exposed to every passing impulse. You will notice that when self-respect is present, your energy becomes more stable, not because you are trying to appear strong, but because you are no longer internally divided. There is no constant negotiation between what you know is right and what you choose to do. That negotiation is what drains presence. When it ends, energy becomes coherent. At midday, observe where you have acted in alignment with your judgment and where you have compromised it. Do not evaluate this emotionally. Observe it structurally. Where did you maintain consistency? Where did you abandon it? Each instance is information about the strength of your internal governance. Use that information to correct future behavior. Self-respect also requires honesty about patterns of approval seeking. You must be willing to see where you shape yourself excessively for others, not to reject relationships, but to remove distortion from them. Relationships built on self-abandonment do not produce respect, they produce dependency, and dependency weakens presence. When you begin to act consistently from internal clarity rather than external pressure, something shifts in how others respond to you. They may not always agree with you, but they will sense that your position is not easily moved by convenience. That stability creates a form of presence that does not require explanation. It is felt before it is understood. But this presence is not built in public. It is built in private decisions where no one is watching. Every time you choose alignment with reason over impulse, you strengthen internal authority. Every time you choose convenience over clarity, you weaken it. The accumulation of these choices determines your energy more than any external factor. At the end of the day, review not your outcomes, but your integrity with your own judgment. Where did you remain consistent? Where did you fracture? Where did you act in alignment with reason? And where did you abandon it for comfort? This review is not punishment. It is restoration of awareness. If you continue this discipline, something becomes clear. Your presence becomes less dependent on external validation. You no longer need constant affirmation to feel stable. Your energy becomes steady because it is no longer fragmented by internal contradiction. That steadiness is what others perceive as quiet strength. In the end, self-respect is not about how you present yourself. It is about how consistently you remain aligned with your own examined judgment. And when that alignment becomes habitual, your presence no longer fluctuates with external conditions. It stabilizes. And that stability is what makes your energy unmistakably grounded, clear, and quietly powerful. Number 10. Peaceful minds carry unforgettable, attractive presence. You keep trying to manage how you are seen, but you rarely stop to examine the condition of the mind that is doing the seeing. That is where everything begins, not in the face, not in the posture, not in the words, but in the internal state that precedes all of them. A restless mind cannot produce a steady presence. A divided mind cannot produce a calm presence, and a mind that is constantly reacting cannot produce anything that feels quietly unforgettable. Peace is not something that appears after life becomes easier. That belief is one of the most persistent errors in judgment. You wait for conditions to settle before you allow yourself to be settled, but conditions are not designed to obey your preference. They shift without permission. If your inner state depends on them, you will remain unstable no matter how favorable life becomes. The Stoic approach reverses this dependence entirely. Peace is not the result of external order. It is the practice of internal order in the presence of external disorder. Look closely at your own mind across a typical day. Notice how quickly it attaches itself to events outside its control. A delay becomes frustration, a comment becomes irritation, a silence becomes suspicion. None of these are inherent realities. They are interpretations layered on top of events, and you rarely question those interpretations before accepting them. That is where your suffering multiplies without need, not in what happens, but in what you add to what happens. A peaceful mind does not mean a passive mind. It means a governed mind. A mind that does not allow every impression to become a command. Most people live as if every thought deserves obedience. A thought appears, and it immediately shapes mood, behavior, and attention. This lack of distance between thought and action creates instability, and instability is always visible, even when it is not spoken. The Stoic practice begins by creating space between perception and judgment. Something happens. That is all that is certain in the beginning. Everything after that is interpretation. You are responsible for that interpretation. If you accept it without examination, you inherit its distortion. If you examine it, you regain control over its influence. That moment of examination is where peace is either lost or preserved. You must begin your mornings with a clear recognition of this responsibility, not as abstract philosophy, but as practical preparation. You will encounter interpretations today that feel immediate and convincing. You will feel urges to respond before understanding. You will feel emotional conclusions forming faster than reason can speak. Decide in advance that you will not obey these first movements without inspection. That decision alone changes the trajectory of your internal life. Throughout the day, observe how often your mind moves without your permission. It travels into assumptions about others, predictions about outcomes, and judgments about your own worth. None of this movement is grounded in what is actually present. It is projection built on habit. And habit is not truth. It is repetition without examination. A peaceful mind interrupts this repetition constantly. The interruption is not forceful. It is deliberate awareness. You notice the movement of thought, and you return attention to what is real, what is actually happening here, what is actually under my control in this moment, what is interpretation and what is fact. This constant return is not a single act, it is repeated discipline, and repetition of correction is what forms stability. Most emotional disturbance is not caused by external conditions themselves, but by resistance to those conditions. You expect reality to conform to preference, and when it does not, you interpret that as disturbance, but reality does not operate according to preference. It operates according to cause and effect. When you resist what has already occurred, you create an internal conflict that has no productive outlet. Peace emerges when resistance is replaced by accurate perception. Accurate perception does not require approval of events. It requires recognition of them without distortion. You can see clearly without agreeing. You can accept reality without endorsing it. This distinction is essential. Without it, acceptance becomes misunderstanding. With it, acceptance becomes clarity, and clarity is the foundation of peace. You must also examine how often your mind amplifies small disturbances into extended narratives. A single comment becomes a chain of imagined meanings. A brief discomfort becomes a long internal argument. A minor delay becomes a prediction of failure. This expansion is not perception, it is uncontrolled interpretation. A disciplined mind cuts this expansion early by returning to simple facts. During the day, practice observing your internal narrative without becoming it. When a judgment arises, do not immediately identify with it. Recognize it as a mental event. Ask whether it is necessary, whether it is accurate, whether it serves clarity or merely emotional continuation. Most narratives dissolve when examined closely. What remains is usually simpler and easier to handle. Peace also depends on how you relate to what is not under your control. Much of your mental unrest comes from attempting to manage outcomes that do not belong to you. You want control over how others perceive you, how situations unfold, how timing aligns with your expectations, but none of these are fully within your governance. The Stoic method is to redirect attention away from outcomes and toward conduct. You govern intention, you govern effort, you govern attention, you govern response. These are the boundaries of your responsibility. When you remain within them, your mind stabilizes because it is no longer stretched across uncontrollable variables. When you step outside them, you enter a space of constant tension because you are trying to control what cannot be controlled. At midday, pause and check whether your mind is currently operating within its proper domain. Are you focused on what you can do or on what you wish others would do? Are you engaged in action or in resistance? Are you examining your own judgment or attempting to mentally rewrite external conditions? This awareness prevents accumulation of unnecessary disturbance. A peaceful mind is also marked by reduced urgency. Urgency often comes from misunderstanding importance. Not everything that feels pressing is actually significant. Emotional intensity can create false priority. The Stoic slows this impulse by questioning whether immediate reaction is required or whether reason can guide a more measured response. Many situations lose their pressure when examined without emotional acceleration. As you continue this practice, you begin to notice a shift in presence. You are less reactive to interruption, less disturbed by uncertainty, less dependent on external validation for internal stability. This is not emotional dullness. It is emotional regulation guided by reason. The mind becomes less volatile, not because it feels less, but because it interprets more accurately. You also begin to see how peace influences how others experience you. People respond differently to a mind that is not constantly shifting in reaction. They sense steadiness. They sense that you are not easily pulled into emotional escalation. That steadiness does not require performance. It is the byproduct of consistent internal governance. But this state cannot be maintained without review. At the end of the day, examine where your mind remained steady and where it drifted into reaction. Identify moments where interpretation overtook observation. Identify where resistance replaced acceptance of what is. This review is not self-criticism, it is calibration of perception. If you continue this discipline, something becomes clear over time. External events lose their ability to dominate your internal condition, not because they change, but because your interpretation of them becomes more precise. Precision reduces unnecessary emotional movement, and reduced unnecessary movement is what we recognize as peace. In the end, peaceful presence is not a personality trait. It is the result of repeated correction of judgment. It is the refusal to allow unexamined thought to govern perception. It is the discipline of returning again and again to what is real, what is controllable, and what is reasoned. And when that becomes habitual, presence no longer depends on circumstance. It becomes steady in itself, and that steadiness is what people never forget.